Hello, everybody. My name is Jozben Barrett. I'm an actor, director, producer, and educator in the world of theater. I'm here on behalf of Stone Soup with today's special guest, Enni Harlan. Enni is 16 and she wrote her first published book, Remember the Flowers, from ages 13 to 14, which is a memoir in the form of poetry and won Stone Soup's 2021 book contest. She's an aspiring classical pianist and writer, and recently was named LA Youth Poet Ambassador and finalist. Let's please welcome Enni Harlan. Enni, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Jozben. So good to see you today. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Enni. How did you first become involved with Stone Soup, and then how did Stone Soup help you as a writer?
Well, I first was introduced to Stone Soup when I was 11 years old. I was reading this work by all these kids my age, and it was like at professional level, so I was just mind blown that these kids my age were writing these things, and I wrote them over and over again. So it was just inspirational to me. So I went in on this thing, and I ended up applying to a competition. It was a flash fiction contest, and I did not win the competition. It was an ego check, and also it was motivational for me to keep learning as a writer. And I went back to Stone Soup when I was 13. This is when quarantine hit, so around 2020. And I was on their newsletter, so they were sending out these daily prompts during quarantine. And I started doing these, and they had these weekly flash contests where you get a prompt on Monday and you send something in on Friday, I think, and then they choose like the top 5 to publish on their blog. So I sent in my work a few times. After 3 failed attempts, I ended up on the Stone Soup blog. I wrote The Onion, my first poem on Stone Soup. Anyway, that was a little motivational moment for me because I was on this blog, available worldwide, and that was just huge to me. So after that, I started joining the Stone Soup Book Club and the writing workshop, which was really fun because we got to talk about books. I like to read, and in writing workshops, they would introduce us to these different literary devices and like different techniques and genres of writing. So I was able to experiment a lot in that time. And all of that experimentation was really fundamental in sort of creating the writing style that I'm using today and also still evolving, definitely. So, yeah, Stone Soup has definitely played a huge role in developing me as a writer.
Um, what inspired you to write this book?
It was actually not originally supposed to be a book. I didn't think of myself as a poet like prior to age 13, actually. When I was 12 years old, my English teacher had this whole, she incorporated the Get Lit curriculum into our English class. So we did spoken word poetry for about a month. And this was like me realizing that poetry doesn't really have to be Shakespeare sonnets, for instance. It could be a small moment. And I was really into small moments, especially at this time, because during quarantine we were separated from a lot of my family because I was really close with my aunt and my uncle and my grandma. And we still are, but before that I was seeing them every day. So because of COVID, we didn't see them for about a year. And during quarantine, I wanted to create something for their birthday because I always made handmade gifts because we were thrifty, and so I decided to, instead of drawing like a little picture of us together, I decided to make a poem for my aunt's birthday. And the first poem I wrote for her is actually the first poem in this book, Remember the Flowers. It's called Summer Days with Emo. And it's my first ever memory of just being with my aunt on a summer day. And she actually remembers it too. So the fact that we both remembered this, and it was just really cool how we could just bond over this moment and preserve it through poetry. So I thought that would mean a lot to her if I gave it to her. And also, since she wasn't there, like I wasn't able to watch her read it, but I knew that she would remember it. And this is like my new tradition starting from that day. I made little poems for every single person in my family from then on. It was it was fun because I could basically just relive this moment, but also sometimes they wouldn't remember and I would bring it back to them. But around halfway through the year, when I was in the middle of writing these poems, I sort of decided to create it into a book because my mom said, "Why don't you write about the people that you love?" So that was kind of what turned me into writing these poems. And around halfway through, when I was started turning it into a book, I sort of just collected it and arranged it chronologically. And I was also inspired by the composer Robert Schumann, who wrote a collection of pieces called Kinderscenen, which means scenes from childhood. And he basically portrays a different scene from childhood in each piece through music. So this inspired me to create my own book of my own scenes of childhood based on my own memories. So pretty much in honor of my childhood experiences.
What an inspirational story, Annie. So why did you choose to title your book Remember the Flowers?
Yeah, this title actually came to me not at the end of the writing process, which was shocking for me. I usually come up with, I'm like at the end and I'm like, what should I title it? But not in this case. I was in the middle of the writing process, and this title actually emerged from a poem which wasn't even in the actual book, but it was called Remember the Flowers. But it was on a very literal basis. But the more that this title grew on me, I thought it doesn't really relate to the specific poem, but it relates more to the entire collection of poetry. And it had two meanings. Um, the first meaning is that it's centered around these two poems, which were entitled Walking with Harmony and Walking Again. Harmony means grandmother in Korean. So both of these poems were about walking with my grandmother, and the first one is written about when I was 4 years old, and the second one is about when I was 14 years old. So it's 10 years apart. And the second one's during quarantine, so we're walking 6 feet apart, and it's sort of this nostalgia and also this, it's like remembering, but we're also reliving the experience. Um, and they're both about my grandmother who grew up surrounded by the countryside in pre-war Korea. So nature was a really important part of her childhood, and the fact that she remembers the flowers literally in these poems is, it's kind of metaphorical for her remembering these scenes from her childhood, and also the people from her childhood. So it's like an ode to her homeland and also just these memories of the life that she lived and her family, these people that she loved so much. And it mirrored my own love for my own childhood and memories. And I felt like this sort of was in relation to all of the other poems because each poem is a memory. Like I said, it's a memory from my childhood. And I think that the flowers represent these greater memories and these people from my childhood. So even though flowers don't last forever, it's the fact that we're remembering them because the memory is what lasts forever.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Thank you, Annie. Um, Now, through your collection of works, what are some of the themes that you wanted to convey? And also, why did you choose those specific themes?
The themes. I think that I didn't really choose these themes intentionally. They were pre-existent within the poems that I wrote, since each poem is about my childhood. So these themes were like what shaped my childhood. So that's answering the second question. But the themes, one of the first main themes is my biracial Asian American identity and growing up in this household with two cultures. So throughout my book, I'm definitely exploring this sense of sort of being a mixed person, and you don't feel like you completely identify with either culture fully, because also feeling like an imposter because there would be people telling me, like, I remember when I was 12 years old, this girl called me a wannabe Korean, and I was like, I grew up in this mixed culture, so I felt like I could identify with being Korean, but also not being able to because I was also half of this other culture. And but then I would go to like my to American households that, and I wouldn't be able to fully identify with everything. And like for instance, sometimes I didn't know the English word for things. I remember I would only know the Korean word for certain things, and then also not knowing like certain cultural norms of different cultures. So sometimes I felt invalidated because of my appearance and people telling me you don't look Korean or you don't look white, or just also, yeah, definitely. And there's also this Korean traditional outfit that you wear on Lunar New Year's. This is a very specific example, but we would wear this to school in elementary school, and it was called hanbok. So we would dress up on Lunar New Year's, and the tradition is you bow to your elders and you wish them good luck in the new year. And it's this traditional outfit, so sometimes I felt like, well, if I don't look Korean, am I Korean enough to be wearing this outfit that is traditionally from Korea? So, like, is this cultural appropriation? And but also being half of this culture and not really knowing. So that was a huge theme throughout this book, and exploring the identity of myself. Another big theme was my selective mutism. And basically, selective mutism means that I wasn't able to talk in a lot of public situations when I was for many years. And there's one poem entitled School Days with Selective Mutism. And it's about me going to school for the first time and suddenly just not being able to talk. It wasn't really that I was scared of talking, but more that I couldn't talk. So it's also one of the reasons why this is a poetry collection and not a novel, because if it was a novel, it would be just a lot of dialogue that was not said by myself. So you wouldn't know what was going on in my own head a lot of the time. And for about like the first half of the whole book, I don't really say anything to anyone other than my family, which was pretty much my life. I wasn't able to express myself in public, but then at the end of the book, it ends with my own dialogue. So it's showing that I'm finally able to speak, and this evolution of myself and finally being able to find my voice. One of the other themes is sort of related to my biracial identity, but it's about my ancestors and immigration, specifically on my mom's side of the family. There's 9 poems, which are about my journey to Korea when I was 5 years old. And the first one in the 9 poems is called May, and the last one is called The Place I Call Home. So one of them is about my great grandmother, who she wanted to be a pilot. So it's about like these strong-minded women throughout my culture and my family history. And my great grandfather was part of the Korean independence movement. So it was like this huge line of these figures that I didn't really know, but I was hearing these stories about them, and I paralleled it with just journeying to Korea when I was a young girl and finding out about this family history that has shaped who I am today. And the most important theme, I think, in this book is the importance of family, because it is the whole book. Each memory in this poem is, these people are the memory. They are memories of these people and the shared experiences with my family and how they've shaped who I am.
Wow, thank you for sharing. These are such precious and important themes that you've shared. Um, what do you hope readers will take away from reading your book, Remember the Flowers?
First of all, representation. Representation is so important. I remember when I was growing up, I was always looking for characters that I could identify with in the books that I was reading. I remember when I was like 8 years old, I read this book called Alvinho. You may have heard of it. It's about this Asian American boy who grows up and he has selective mutism. So I was like, oh my god, this is the most relatable thing I've ever read in my life. But it was so rare for me to find a book like that. I'm pretty sure he was biracial too, so it was just so rare for me to find this kind of book that I could just relate to, and their family experiences and the way that he was talking about life. I was just like, it validated my own experiences and I felt seen. So I also think so there's a lot of false representation. I do remember reading, there was this one book series I really liked, which will remain unnamed, but there was one Asian American character in it, and she was just, first of all, she was a carbon copy of Claudia Kishi from the Babysitters Club, which was revolutionary within its time, but we have come so much farther from that in society that there should be such a larger variety of representation of Asian American characters, and I don't think we need to go back in time to these characters. And every time this girl looked in the mirror in the book, I quote, she noted her almond-shaped eyes, and it was just really annoying because it was written by this person who had no understanding of the culture. So being able to find this person who you should be able to relate to in some ways, but you're just completely not able to relate to at all, it was really annoying to me as a kid. So I sort of aimed in putting this book out there. I really want to validate people's experiences and open their eyes also to different experiences, just like learning about different cultures as well. And also, there's a lot of universal experiences that I wanted to portray in this book. So representing people in that way, just like I said about Grace Lynn and Tommy DePaula, how they're able to portray these universal experiences of childhood, in spite of being from different decades in time, just being able to relate to that just because you're a kid, and these feelings that you have growing up. I think that one of the other things that I wanted to portray through this book was to cherish small moments. I think that's so important. Appreciating these memories and family and people in life, because it's like the idea of remember the flowers. The flowers don't last forever, but holding on to these memories is so important because the memories they take root in who we are and who we become.
Wow. Yes, your poems are very universal. So I know like we're in two different places within our life, but your book is relatable for a grown gentleman and a professor as it is for a youth at 12, 13, 14 years old. So I want to thank you for inspiring me and many others with your work. This was a very amazing conversation. I think we're very, very fortunate just to have such a well-accomplished author in the room with us at such a young age. Again, Enni, thank you for your time. Please go get Remember the Flowers, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having me.